Hello YouTube. This video is in response to a special request from someone who is participating in some of the comment section of a video I posted. So this is for you, Mr. Jose Gonzalez, or Master Jose Gonzalez. He's a Godan in Goju-ryu, I believe. So a little bit of background on Jose. He grew up and trained in the same area I did, Hamilton Township, Trenton, New Jersey. So apparently I had met someone that he knew very well, the late Craig Devries, and when I asked for information about how he died, because the last time I saw him he was a very active, fit martial artist, and yet again somebody from my hometown who's a martial artist and was a very dynamic individual appears to have died ahead of their time. Said he wanted to give me a private message, so that just tells me it's something that he'll want to keep confidential. So I'm not going to mention, once I learn how he passed away, I'm just not going to mention it on my post. It's probably something people want to keep to themselves. So Craig Devries, what an individual. When I met him I was probably 16, and I think I had just recently gotten a brown belt under Sensei Jeff Mack in Goju Dao Te. It was not yet the later version Goju Dao Te Taekwondo, although Jeff had earned his black belt in Taekwondo at that time, and so he was teaching his American Okinawan system. And if I recall properly, some of the details are hazy because it was a long time ago, folks. We're talking about 1987 or 86 or something like that, right? We were in a Arthur Murray dance studio, I believe. It was a big, roomy dance studio not too far down the street from where I lived. A couple blocks, and it was very convenient for me. So oftentimes I would go home and I would train in my basement, then I would hop on my bike or walk or run over to the studio before it opened and wait for Jeff, and then train in there. So I had a really good time over there. There were some brown belt's a tough period for any martial artist, okay? Whether it takes you a year to get your brown belt, or 2 years, or whether it takes you 6. In just about any martial art that has that step before black belt, that final step, that final hurdle, you're often there for a year or more. It's often a gatekeeper belt, and they start putting the pressure on you. The fighting gets harder. If you're fighting with black belts, they hit you more and they hit you harder, and more is expected out of you. You're also teaching, but you may not be, the person that's putting you in that position may not be good at teaching you how to teach, okay? So it was a really intense phase for me. And around that time, one day Jeff, and we were on first name basis since I started with him. Okay, so I'm going to refer to him as Jeff from now on. He's no longer active in the martial arts. He hasn't done any teaching in decades. And I'm the last master level 4th degree black belt left in that system. So he says, "Oh, I'm gonna introduce you to a friend of mine. Grew up together." And he never called Craig DeVries his first teacher or first instructor. He said, he was one of the guys that taught me growing up, and he's a great, martial artist. He can really fight. But he never called him his primary teacher. He always referred to Phil Holder. He was very much a loyal Phil Holder guy, all right, in terms of his lineage. And he talked about his other things, and I'd met some of his other instructors. So Master Gonzalez, you say that he was his primary instructor in the beginning, his first instructor, his main instructor. So there is a little disconnect there, and it just may be the way you two perceive things. Who knows, right? So when I met him, I think he was about 37, and Jeff said he had just gotten back from Okinawa. So he was balding. If he wasn't balding, I think his hair would have been like light sandy maybe, and he was real solid, okay, but not in a bulky way. He was definitely had that martial artist build, when he took off his shirt, he had the 6 packs, he had the pecs. He was maybe not much taller than me, definitely well built. He had gotten out of the Marines, I guess, and had done at least one tour in Okinawa. Doing what? I don't know. I don't know if he was a combat MOS. I don't know if he was a clerk, a typist. It's something I never learned. He came there with a friend of his named Dojo, who Master Gonzalez says that they're best friends. And Dojo, he had a Fu Manchu. He was also that wiry type, you know. Dark black hair. I think he was Italian. He definitely looked like he could be Italian. Whereas Devries, I mean, that's a Dutch name, and you know, he might have, obviously from his father, he might have been a bit Pennsylvania Dutch on one side of the family. So New Jersey is a mixture of all different types of people. Hamilton, that's one thing I miss about it. You could join a martial arts school. You'd have Puerto Ricans, you'd have Chinese, you'd have Koreans, you'd have. I was born in Turkey. You have, of course, your WASPs, your Germanic types, lots of Italians, you know, and you all trained together, and it was just a great brotherhood and sisterhood. So they came in, and you know, they had this swagger about them, and Craig is loud. His voice is just loud. He has a voice. I would describe it if you were a tough guy that smoked cigarettes and got punched in the throat a lot. You'd have this gravelly voice. It was like that. A bit like Jimmy Durante, maybe, or you know, the guy who played Mickey in Rocky, the trainer. A bit like that. Okay, puffed his chest out, real confident guy, and so he had on a red belt. Okay, and I think he was wearing a Shin's karate uniform along with Dojo. They both had red belts on, which in that system, that's right before black belt, as opposed to some Okinawan systems where red belt is 10th dan. They weren't 10th dan. So formally, they were represented as, you know, advanced martial artist and, you know, just under black belt. And Dojo, I don't know him by any other name, said, well, you know, we just never tested. You know, we like to train, we like to fight, but, you know, if I'd have bothered testing, if I wanted to spend that money, then, you know, maybe we'd be both 4 or 3 black belts by then. Looking at the way Craig moved, I could completely believe that. Dojo moved a little differently. Watching him kick, for example, it looked like, you know, he was a kicker and he could move, but maybe there was like a problem with his back or his knees, or maybe he had just been out of it a while, so there was a slight stiffness to his movements that I detected. I'm about 16 at the time, but I was really into observing people, trying to figure him out. Whereas Craig was just a great kicker. He did lockout kicks. And I gotta, again, give you a little background. I know I'm rambling a bit, but you guys gotta get the background of this. Hamilton Township, New Jersey, at the time, 60s, 70s, 80s, started to have a little decline in the 90s. It was filled with really competitive martial artists of different styles. And because Shin's Karate, Jay Shin, Chuck Norris's instructor, established a school in that region, kicking was really big. Even styles that normally didn't do a lot of high kicks and spinning kicks were doing them, because the Shin's Karate people were not shy about entering closed tournaments and open tournaments. And there was some cross-pollination as well. I know Dennis Dwyer had a little bit of background at Shin's briefly. I know, for example, Rick Hahn, who was the head instructor of the American Karate Institute. When I met him, I mentioned something about the Jade Dragon and Steve Chambliss, another Shin student. He's like, oh boy, that guy's really good. You know, we used to work out together for years in my backyard all the time. That guy can fight. So, you know, they had a lot of influence. So Hamilton Township, everybody liked to kick above the waist. Everybody liked to kick the face. Really high kicks. And Craig had really high kicks. And he could throw that side kick and roundhouse kick and lock it out and everything. And so we had this class, and we were doing kicks and everything, and going through the whole entire workout. And then we were doing kata and everything, and a little sparring. And I think Craig, Dojo were kind of, when we got to the sparring, they were just sparring each other. And he goes up to me, and he goes, oh, you're pretty good, you're pretty good. And then he takes his hand, and he puts it on my forehead. He's like doing this to my forehead. And I'm like, what's this guy doing? And he goes, you're not even breaking a sweat. He says, this stuff isn't hard enough for you. You're in too good shape for this. We got to really push you. I'm like, sure, yes, sir. Sounds good to me, you know. At the time, I was really into hardcore training in that class, and because I was the top brown belt. I was always trying to get a little better. And when we were practicing basics, he'd call out the command like front kick, side kick, and I'd be looking forward, but my peripheral vision, I'd be seeing the people next to me move, and I'd try to beat them to the kick. And sometimes I would ignore the verbal command and just try to cue off of their movement to develop my reflexes. I'd always do push-ups and crunches and squats before and after class. Just try to do more than everybody. So Craig and Dojo come in another time. And I think it might have been a weekend, so we had an extended class. And again, we're going through the basics, but this time, Craig is teaching the class. Jeff let him teach. And again, real dynamic individual, really loud, and he's like, some of you are just too relaxed. When you're in your Junbi, you should be tensing and flexing your muscles, just trying to, breathe in and trying to flex those muscles and develop yourself, which I tried that. I don't advise it. I think it's bad for your health if you're constantly tensing and flexing throughout the class. Give yourself all kinds of problems, maybe blood pressure, stroke, something like that. So I don't advocate it, but I would try it and quickly said to myself at the time, like, I don't think this is good for my health, right? But the rest of the class goes on, and at one point, we're doing 3-step kicking, which is in classical karate you would call it sanbon kumite, and 3-step sparring, and we did a very modernized version of it. It was one of the more practical things Jeff did. You'd square off in fighting stances, and you could do any 3 attacks you wanted. At first it was just 3 kicks, and then sometimes it was combinations of kicks and hands, and the guy would practice backing up and blocking, and then you go back and forth just to develop your reflexes. And at some point Jeff's like, okay, go work with these new students. They were like housewives. And I'm watching Dojo and Craig do 3-step sparring, and they're doing like eye gouges at each other and stuff, like these guys are intense, right? And they're and they're all like screaming at each other, having a good time. And I was just like, wow, this is cool, Yeah. So then Jeff is like, go over your 1-step techniques. So he says, and this is. I was so out of my depth. He's like, hey, go teach Craig and Dojo the 15 1-step techniques. So I went over there to show them, and I guess they were very similar to some of what Shin's karate did, but a couple of them weren't. And I said, well, in this technique you want to grab the hand and pull as you kick, and they just kind of looked at me funny, especially Dojo, like, oh, you have nothing to teach us, And I said, all right, I'm not going to sit here and argue. These guys are obviously good. They've obviously been at this a long time, great fighters and everything. So, but I mean, they were doing the technique wrong. My job was to teach them the sequences of combinations and then teach them how to do it correctly, like the rest of the class. And they just kind of went off and did their own thing. And I was like, all right, pick your battles, as they say. So then Jeff has us square off to spar, and he calls me up there. And I don't have any, we don't have any protective gear, mouthpiece, cup, anything. And immediately, he calls in Craig and Dojo, and I'm like, huh? And he says, begin. And so they're just swarming me. And they're just like punching and kicking me, and I'm so swarmed. I wanted to basically pull back and throw kicks and give myself a little distance to figure them out, but they were just right on me. So I remember throwing a few punches here and turning and throw a few punches here, and every time I turned to hit, I remember landing a few punches, not many. I remember maybe getting a kick or something here, and it was all very well controlled. None of those kicks hit really hard, right? You could tell that they were powerful kicks. They'd hit you, but they weren't damaging you. And so feeling kind of overwhelmed, I remember backing up a little bit so that they weren't on both sides of me. And Dojo came to throw a kick, and out of sheer panic, I wound up grabbing a leg. So pure luck. That, and maybe, again, I got the impression that either he hadn't practiced in a while, or maybe his knee or his back was bothering me. So, maybe, and they certainly weren't trying to hurt me. Okay. So I have this leg in my hand. I don't know what to do with it. So I just like stepped in and lifted my hands up, and he fell. And Then I turned and Craig was in front of me, and then he actually backed off a little bit and squared off like he actually wanted to do something more strategic rather than just step in and just hit me nonstop, because he was having no trouble doing that. So, and then for some reason Jojo didn't join back in. So in retrospect, Craig may have given him a single, "Hey, I want to check this kid out," right? And that voice of his. Jojo may have taken a hard fall. Or maybe I pissed him off, and because he didn't want to hurt me, he's like, "You know what? I'm not going to hurt this punk kid." So, or maybe Jeff gave him a signal. I don't know. So I'm squared off, and Craig is over there. And again, this guy's 37. He's an experienced martial artist. He'd been training for I don't know how long, since the early 70s, right? So I remember getting hit with a kick. I don't remember seeing it. Okay? I don't know where it hit. I think maybe it hit me back in the head, roundhouse kick, something. All right? Very controlled, very light, right? Nothing that would have hurt me. And then I remember seeing like a spinning back kick that thumped into my ribs and backed off. So I was like, okay, this guy's obviously good, obviously better than me. So I pulled my guard in tight. I made sure I bunched up, and I started moving around, and I threw a skip up roundhouse kick real low to his midsection. And the idea was I was going to throw that and get a back fist off. At least that was the plan. All right. And as my leg comes down, instead of finding a target for my back fist, boom, Craig took a stiff arm and swung it at me and hit my midsection. And right after it landed, for some reason, I hit him with the same thing. And I'd never actually been hit with a stiff arm before. Like it didn't make a lot of sense, and it was more a little bit of fist, some forearm. And I was like, okay, I can take that. So for some reason, I just wanted to throw my own stiff arm. So he had cocked back, and he was throwing his stiff arm. So we sat there like 4 or 5 times, just stiff arming each other. And I was thinking to myself, man, I'm so glad he's not bending that arm and folding it into a hook. And I was thinking, maybe he's just trying to test me. Maybe he just wants to see if I'm going to chicken out or something. So we were like playing chicken with our forearms. And then he backs off and starts moving around. And Jeff is like, okay, yame. And then, I bowed, I shook hands, and he tousles my head. Hey, you're not so bad, kid. You're not so bad. So I was like, okay, that's really cool, because that guy could have really hurt me, right? Jojo probably could have really hurt me, right? So I was like, this guy's cool. I hope he comes back here to teach often, because quite frankly, he was better than Jeff, okay? I knew that Jeff wasn't the best instructor in Hamilton, but I didn't have the kind of money that I needed to learn from everybody. I could pay for lessons at the American Karate Institute, and Jeff did a work study for me. And for years, I did that for years, obviously, to get my brown belt. In the same amount of time it took for me to get my brown belt with Jeff, I got my orange belt 3rd stripe at the American Karate Institute. Kind of lets you know that, the way the systems are set up. So, what can I say about Craig Devries? He's a real tough guy. Loud, just had that voice that could project forever. Real flashy individual. As Master Gonzalez says, he didn't have, his hands were not as good as his legs. He wasn't really a boxer, right? All of Hamilton Township at the time, pretty much, the main schools were big shot people. They would throw 1 or 2 big shots, a big kick. There was a lot of point sparring going on in those days, open and closed. And they were always trying to land that big shot or 1-2 combination. Everybody was kicking high. The Shotokan people were kicking high. You had Tang Sudo, you had Taekwondo, you had lots of branches from shins. You had the Trenton Budokan, which was a mixture of different arts. So he, Master Gonzalez says that he's the best kicker ever to come out of Hamilton Township. I don't know. I didn't know all the kickers. And honestly, there was a lot of talent there. There was a lot of talent at the Jade Dragon. Parks Taekwondo opened up in the later years, and that's Olympic Taekwondo. I would say he was one of the better high kickers I saw. if you're doing a style that has lots of low kicks like Wing Chun or Muay Thai, it's a different type of kick. It may not look as amazing. But I knew that he had very powerful, very long range, extended, pivoted, powerful kicks, lockout type kicks, spinning kicks, jumping kicks. Didn't see him do much jumps, but I knew he could do them. He had a hard 1-2 punch and a ridge hand, but he didn't close in and box. And nobody at that time had too much of an organized ground game. So in a sense, there was that deficiency that we all had. I mean, I didn't see him grapple. I don't know. He may have done judo or wrestled, but obviously didn't get a chance to see that. It actually made a huge impression on me because I wanted to go in the Marine Corps, and I was like, wow, he just came back from Okinawa. Look at how awesome he is. So that made me want to join, solidified my desire to join the Marine Corps and, you know, learn some martial arts in the Marine Corps. I'm like, oh, I want to be like that. Now, this is video 1. I'm going to give you video 2 on the other time that I saw him at a tournament where he was mostly refereeing. Okay?